Her daughter-in-law called her a leech, within earshot of her own grandchildren. Deborah Taylor didn't speak. She simply adjusted the casserole she'd brought. By month's end, Brooke's name would vanish from the deed, the mailbox, and the mortgage. Deborah had spent years being polite, present, overlooked. Now she was a co-owner with a ledger, and the law. And when they asked how it all happened, she'd point to the paperwork and smile. We're about to begin. But if you'd like, share where you're joining from. It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence. It lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The scent of sizzling bratwurst hung thick in the humid North Carolina air, mixing with the tang of lighter fluid and too-sweet lemonade. Deborah stood by the drink cooler, her hand resting on a sweating can of LaCroix she didn't particularly like, but brought anyway because Brooke insisted on having healthier options for guests. She'd arrived early, as usual, helped set up the folding tables, sliced watermelon in the kitchen without being asked, and placed deviled eggs, her signature, onto a chipped white ceramic platter she always brought from home. Tyler gave her a distracted side hug and ducked off to manage the grill. Brooke flitted from one group of neighbors to the next like a wind-up hostess, laughing too loud and drinking wine too fast. Deborah had just refilled the ice bucket when she heard it. "She's just here for the free food." The voice drifted over the steady buzz of conversation, clear, crisp, dismissive. Deborah didn't turn around. She didn't need to. Brooke's nasal lilt had a way of slicing through the noise, especially when she was speaking to her own parents, two sun-spotted retirees from Raleigh who always parked diagonally in the cul-de-sac like they owned it. Deborah's fingers stiffened around the LaCroix. She blinked once, twice. The laughter that followed wasn't cruel. It was worse than that. It was casual, comfortable, like it was a shared truth that didn't require defense. She'd made 3 dishes. She'd helped set up chairs. She brought paper napkins because Brooke forgot them last year and blamed the Dollar Tree. And still, she was the punchline. A breath caught in her throat, but she smoothed her face before turning. No one was looking at her. They never were, really. She backed away from the cooler slowly, making her way toward the patio's edge where the azaleas had just begun to bloom despite the heat. Her smile was there, technically, the one people expected. But behind her sunglasses, her eyes scanned the open kitchen through the sliding glass door. That's when she saw it. The drawer beneath the microwave hadn't closed all the way. From inside, a familiar manila folder peeked out, thick with papers, its tab marked in green ink. She recognized the seal on the front before she could stop herself from stepping closer. HOA correspondence. Her pulse quickened. She wasn't nosy, not really. But some things found you whether you wanted them or not. The last time she saw that same type of envelope was 3 weeks ago, sitting on her own desk, sent in error, as if she still sat on the board. She'd called Karen to let her know. They laughed about it. Then Karen told her something that stuck in her mind like a thumbtack. "You know Brooke and Tyler still haven't paid last quarter's dues, right? I've sent 3 notices." At the time, Deborah had let it slide. She figured they'd sort it out like grown-ups do, but now, "She's just here for the free food." The words burned at the back of her throat. She looked back toward the yard. Brooke was telling a story near the grill, her voice animated, hand clutching a mason jar cocktail like it was an accessory. A few of the other wives laughed too hard at something she said. Tyler turned a hot dog with metal tongs and didn't look up. Deborah stepped into the kitchen without thinking. She didn't touch the drawer. Just stood there, letting the low thrum of bass-heavy party music seep in through the window screens, her fingers brushing the rim of her watch. That folder, that drawer, that sentence by the cooler. 3 small things. 1 big shift. Deborah turned slowly and walked back toward the crowd, her sandals silent on the porch. She would stay a little longer, make small talk, maybe eat a piece of sheet cake even though it was too sweet. And then she'd go home, open her laptop, and start reading through the HOA bylaws, just to refresh herself, just to be sure. Because sometimes revenge doesn't arrive with thunder. Sometimes it starts with a drawer left slightly open. The chairs had been rented, not bought. Deborah remembered that clearly now, standing with a paper plate of coleslaw while Brooke gushed to a neighbor about upgrading the hosting game this year. But just 3 weeks ago, she'd seen the rental invoice left open on Tyler's kitchen counter, half covered by a coupon flyer. $168 for folding chairs. Another $55 for delivery. That wouldn't have mattered, except the total sat right next to a pink HOA past due notice and an envelope from the electric company. Deborah took a slow bite of her coleslaw and chewed like she was counting to 10. The thing was, this wasn't how it was supposed to go. When Brooke and Tyler first moved into Oakcrest Glen, Deborah had been proud. The neighborhood was polished but not flashy, families with flagpoles and potted hydrangeas, a neighborhood watch that took itself too seriously, and a tidy HOA with rules and reminders like clockwork. It was Deborah who had floated the down payment when Tyler's pre-approval came in too low. Deborah who'd nudged him toward this neighborhood in the first place, thinking the schools would be good for the kids someday. Thinking stability would buy peace. She didn't expect gratitude, but she hadn't braced for contempt either. Brooke's parents came to the first housewarming wearing gold watches and judgment. They'd wrinkled their noses at Deborah's off-brand potato salad and asked, too loudly, if the carpet would be fully replaced or just shampooed. Brooke had smiled, like a pageant queen posing through discomfort, but never corrected them. Never once said, "Deborah made this possible." The next week, Brooke posted a photo of the porch on Instagram with the caption, "Hard work pays off." Deborah had scrolled past it with her lips pressed tight. Back in the present, she spotted Karen, the HOA treasurer, hovering near the lemonade dispenser. Deborah waited until Karen's husband turned to fix a jammed Bluetooth speaker before slipping up beside her. "How's the mailbox situation?" Deborah asked with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Karen chuckled, already reading the subtext. "Still crooked. And no, they haven't paid." Deborah nodded once. "Second quarter. Third, too." That made it 3 months behind. No payment plan, no communication, just rented chairs and artisan barbecue sauces while fines quietly stacked in the background. "I guess some people think rules are optional," Deborah murmured. Karen raised her eyebrows but said nothing. As a former HOA secretary, Deborah still received the occasional misrouted notice or outdated CC. Most she tossed, but the one she got 2 days ago, an envelope addressed to D. Taylor, Ret Beecher with Tyler and Brooke's address printed below, had felt like a warning shot, a ghost of obligation rising from the files she once color-coded in her sunroom. She'd read the enclosed report twice. Final notice. Lawn maintenance violation, overdue fines, language like intent to proceed, and lien eligibility. It had sent a chill through her, but not fear. Something more focused. A spark in her spine that said, "This is information. This is leverage." A burst of laughter broke the moment. Brooke was at it again, play-acting gracious hostess with a group of neighbors Deborah didn't recognize. New couples, likely, still being groomed into her curated circle. "I mean, the smoker was like our biggest investment this year," Brooke said with a toss of her over-highlighted hair. "But Tyler said if we're going to host 4th of July, we have to do it right. This isn't a potluck cul-de-sac, you know?" Deborah smiled tightly. Potluck. She'd brought 3 full dishes. Her gaze swept the crowd. Everyone smiling, clinking glasses, eating from paper plates on top of thin plastic tables, all pretending. That's what this was. A theater of normalcy with folding chairs for props. She set down her plate, folded her hands. Then, slowly, she began building the timeline in her mind. HOA notices. Karen's confirmation, the lien threshold. Tyler's refinance rejection last winter, the loan Brooke applied for without success, the backyard fire pit they bragged about, installed without a permit. She didn't need revenge, but she needed respect. And in places like Oakcrest Glen, respect came with paperwork, not confrontation. Brooke raised her glass again, calling out to a neighbor across the yard. "You guys have to see our patio lights after sunset. Deborah helped hang them, right?" she said sweetly, shooting a glance toward her like a compliment offered in public wiped away everything else. Deborah raised her LaCroix in return. She smiled, and silently began the countdown. Karen met her on the side path behind the recycling bins, where the music didn't quite reach and the citronella candles had given up. Deborah had texted her an hour before with a simple, "Can we talk?" Karen came out holding a plastic cup of wine and wearing her usual HOA committee tank top. The one that said, "Enforce, not ignore," in faded navy letters across the chest. "They've been warned," she said without preamble, "twice for non-payment, once for that jungle they call a lawn." Deborah folded her arms. "So, this is after the final notice?" Karen nodded. "Default fines kicked in last week. They're in pre-lien territory. It's not public yet, but it's getting close." A low whistle left. Deborah's lips. Not dramatic, just sharp enough to release the pressure building behind her temples. "And the grill?" she asked, tilting her head toward the yard where Brooke was now performing her latest monologue to an audience of bored wives and red-faced husbands, holding court like it was her patio kingdom. Karen sipped her drink. "Technically not approved. It's gas-connected. She never submitted the permit form, but no one wants to be the neighbor who ruins the cookout." Deborah gave a tight smile. "Some of us don't mind." A pause passed between them. Karen lowered her voice. "Want a copy of the latest letter? I can get it certified." Deborah didn't hesitate. "Please." They parted like two PTA moms swapping casserole recipes, and Deborah re-entered the party with that familiar retired teacher glide, graceful, unnoticed, steady. She picked up a fresh cup of iced tea and took her place at the fringe of the patio again, just in time to catch Brooke's punchline. "Tyler says we should put in a splash pad next summer, but I told him this neighborhood couldn't handle that much fabulous." The cluster of neighbors chuckled, shallow and short. Deborah's eyes scanned their faces. Not one of them made real eye contact, and then Brooke saw her. "Oh, there's Deborah," Brooke chirped, clapping her hands together. "Did you try the pulled pork? It's from Whole Foods, grass-fed or cage-free or whatever Tyler insists on now." There was that smile, the performative one, stretched thin and sugary, the same one Brooke wore when she handed Deborah a birthday card 2 years ago, with nothing inside but a printed quote about aging gracefully. Deborah held her tea like it was an anchor and nodded politely. She hadn't forgotten the conversation, the one that happened just after the baby was born, when she'd offered to swing by the house during Brooke's recovery to help tidy up or run a load of laundry. Brooke had looked at her with that tight professional smile and said, "Deborah, we're really trying to build boundaries. I think it's best if you don't just show up unannounced. It's our space now. We don't want to blur lines." Her space. That she hadn't paid for, that Deborah had partially funded with a drained CD and 6 weeks of worry over interest rates. She hadn't said anything back then, had swallowed it like a bad pill and nodded, because that's what you do when you're the peacekeeper, when you're the parent trying not to break things. But now Brooke was bragging about custom smoker knobs while foreclosure fines bloomed in the mailbox like mold. Deborah looked down at her tea. The ice had mostly melted. She swirled the last few cubes, watching them bump and clink. She didn't want revenge. She wanted acknowledgement, balance, a return on the emotional investment she'd made in silence for the last 6 years. From the kitchen window, the folder still peeked out from the drawer, still half open, still holding every scrap of power Brooke thought no one had noticed. Deborah took a long sip of her tea and turned her gaze to the yard again, just in time to catch Tyler waving to someone with a practiced politician's grin. She would wait for the certified letter. She'd file it where it belonged, but not in a cabinet. She'd keep it somewhere visible. And next time Brooke mentioned boundaries, she'd know exactly which lines had already been crossed. Deborah smiled to herself, quiet and cool. Brooke had no idea how short her leash had become. The sun sagged low behind the pine trees, turning the sky a muddy lavender as kids dashed barefoot across the grass with sparklers in each hand. The air buzzed with the slow unraveling of the party, paper plates curled at the corners, citronella candles down to waxy nubs, the grill cooling off in silence. Deborah stood near the patio steps, watching the last hour play out like a stage production winding down before the curtain call. Tyler collected empty solo cups with a glazed-over look, occasionally nodding along to half-heard conversations. Brooke, meanwhile, was gathering momentum. Everyone, can I just steal your attention for one last second? Brooke called out, raising her wineglass and climbing onto the edge of the stone planter like it was a podium. We just want to thank y'all for being here tonight. This community means everything to us, especially on a day that's all about family and freedom and grilled meat, she said, laughing at her own joke, a smattering of claps, some half-hearted whoops. The crowd was tired, sticky, polite. Deborah's eyes narrowed just slightly behind her sunglasses. Brooke's tone shifted, lighter, sing-songy. And of course, she added, scanning the group, a huge thank you to those of you who contributed to tonight's meal. Some brought drinks, some brought dishes, and some, she said, her eyes landing on Deborah, just brought their appetite. The laughter that followed wasn't cruel, it was worse, it was comfortable. Deborah felt it roll over, her like the low rumble of distant fireworks, nothing sharp, just a dull, familiar sting. Her LaCroix was flat now. She swirled it once, then drank it down in one slow swallow. She scanned the yard. A few neighbors chuckled nervously. Mrs. Howell, from across the street, busied herself pretending to adjust the flag bunting. The new couple, Dan and Kelsey, she thought, shared a look and turned away. Tyler didn't move. He stood near the deck rail, arms crossed, jaw tight. But he said nothing. Just let the silence settle. Deborah exhaled slowly through her nose. There it was again. That deep, lonely absence where a son's defense should have been. She stepped off the patio, calm and quiet, her flats brushing across the grass without sound. The manila envelope sat folded beneath her arm, just as it had since Karen slipped it into her mailbox 2 days ago. Deborah had weighed its presence like a stone in her purse all afternoon. But stones don't get lighter just because you pretend they're not there. As Brooke took her final sip and made a mock bow, Deborah stepped up onto the edge of the same stone planter. The chatter dimmed. She didn't raise her voice, didn't clink a glass, just reached out and, with measured care, placed the envelope gently on the rim of Brooke's wineglass, resting it so it tipped just slightly toward her hand. For you, Deborah said, her voice smooth and certain. Brooke blinked. The envelope made a soft sound as it slipped into her palm. For a second, she didn't open it, just stared at Deborah, confused, lips parted like she'd misheard something. Then she turned it over. Her fingers paused at the return address. The HOA seal. The certified stamp. Her smile faltered, only slightly, but enough. Deborah stepped down, turned, and walked back toward the patio steps as the crowd dissolved into awkward murmurs and shifting feet. No one stopped her. No one asked anything. She didn't need to stay for the reaction. That part wasn't hers to manage. Halfway to the driveway, she heard Tyler say something, low and urgent, but not to her. Brooke's voice followed, a clipped, "It's nothing," thick with panic. Deborah didn't look back. She kept her gaze forward, steady, letting the porch lights blur in her periphery. Her hand brushed the gate latch. Her heartbeat was slow, cool, measured. This wasn't revenge. Not yet. It was notification, and what Brooke chose to do next would determine just how permanent the consequences became. For a moment, the smoke from the grill hung motionless in the still air, curling like a held breath above the back deck. No one spoke. A sparkler hissed out in the grass nearby. Someone's child called for juice and was quietly shushed. The once buzzing yard had fallen into a soft paralysis. Heads turned, wine glasses paused midair, plastic forks hovering above paper plates. Brooke stood frozen near the planter box, the envelope still open in her hand, eyes scanning its contents like they were written in a foreign language she hadn't studied nearly enough. She looked up, briefly, instinctively, and met Deborah's eyes across the yard. Whatever flicker of bravado she had earlier had burned off like mist on asphalt. Now her smile was gone. Her face pinched in a way that made her look younger, petulant almost, but it didn't last. She folded the notice in half, slowly, carefully, as if pretending the act itself could undo it. Deborah didn't wait to see what came next. She slid through the side gate, tugged it shut behind her with a soft click, and walked down the narrow gravel path toward the street. A porch light flicked on behind her, maybe automatic, maybe not. She didn't turn around. Her hands were calm. Her chest, less so. Inside, a war had begun, the one between guilt and grit, the one she knew too well. She had spent a lifetime cushioning other people's discomfort, soothing, smoothing, swallowing hard truths in favor of peacekeeping. But there was something about that moment, Brooke's voice, the smirks, Tyler's silence, that had sliced through the last of her hesitation. Still, it hadn't felt good. Not exactly. It had felt necessary. She reached her car and sat behind the wheel for a long while, engine off, windows cracked, listening to the distant pop of fireworks across the lake. A mosquito bumped against the windshield. Somewhere behind her, laughter started again, louder than before, forced. A new performance had begun, and she'd been written out of the scene. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat at the small desk in her den, the one that used to hold Tyler's school permission slips and overdue library notices, now cleared except for her reading glasses and a pot of tea going lukewarm beside her elbow. The manila envelope lay in the center like an artifact. She didn't need to reread it. She'd memorized the language days ago, but what she couldn't stop replaying, what gnawed at her just beneath the collarbone, was Brooke's face. Not humiliated, not angry, just surprised, like no part of her ever truly believed Deborah would do something, that she'd cross from passive observer to active consequence. A buzz lit up the corner of the desk. Tyler, you embarrassed us. No greeting, no preamble, just 7 words, hollowed out and cowardly. Deborah stared at the screen. There had been no defense when Brooke made her jokes, no correction when neighbors laughed too loud, but now, when the performance cracked, when the audience scattered, then came the reaction. She typed slowly, "Then pay your bills," and turned off her phone. The next morning, a knock at the door came just after 9. It was Karen. She wore jeans and a windbreaker, clipboard in hand. Her face looked neutral, but her eyes were alert. Deborah didn't invite her in, just stepped outside and closed the door behind her. "They've missed the lien grace period," Karen said quietly. "The board moved to initiate default proceedings. It's early yet, but if it stays unpaid, the house could qualify for auction." Deborah blinked. "Lien auction," she repeated, like she needed to hear the phrase in her own voice. Karen nodded. "Still a couple steps off, but we're past certified warning. If it rolls into the next billing cycle, it gets escalated." The air between them felt different now, charged. Karen didn't ask why Deborah had requested the documents, didn't mention the envelope. Maybe she already knew. Maybe the neighborhood grapevine had done its job overnight. Either way, she just said, "Thought you should know, since you're listed as a co-signer on the original escrow affidavit. Still shows up in our records." Deborah felt something harden in her chest. Not fear, not triumph, something in between, something like ownership. "Thank you," she said, her voice low, steady. Karen offered a small nod and turned to leave. Deborah stood on the porch long after she was gone, bare feet on the cool concrete, sunlight inching across the railing. Her fingers found the side of the doorframe, trailing along the chipped white paint she always meant to touch up, but never did. Inside, her tea had gone cold. Outside, a house Brooke claimed as her own now teetered on the edge of being hers in name only. And Deborah? Deborah finally held the rulebook everyone else thought she'd forgotten. She didn't just know the rules, she helped write them. 3 days after the cookout, Deborah woke to find Brooke's Facebook post waiting like a staged photo in her feed. "Couldn't have asked for a better 4th with our Oakcrest fam. Feeling grateful, full, and fiercely blessed." Below it, a carefully lit carousel of filtered photos, kids with sparklers, charcuterie boards, Tyler squinting at the grill like a culinary hero, Brooke laughing with a wineglass in hand, one arm draped around her mother, the other around Tyler. And there, near the back of one group photo, Deborah, blurred in the corner, half-cropped, mid-step toward the gate. No mention of her name, no tag, no deviled eggs, just an image scrubbed of the envelope. Deborah closed the app and poured herself a cup of coffee. Denial was a hell of a drug. She marked her wall calendar with a thin red pen. Today was the payment deadline, and she had a feeling it would come and go without consequence. 2 days later, Karen confirmed it. "They missed it," she said on the phone, voice clipped. "No contact. No check. It's officially lien listed." Deborah pressed her fingertips together, index to index, forming a tent. "Any other bidders sniffing around?" "Not yet. It's a low-value lien. Most investors don't waste time unless it's bundled." "I'm not most investors," Deborah said, her voice quiet. Karen paused. "You thinking about buying it?" Deborah didn't answer. "Not yet." She drove to the HOA office that afternoon, tucked behind the community library and the weekly bake sale bulletin board. No one gave her a second glance. She still had the old parking sticker in her windshield from her board days, faded but visible. Inside, the walls still smelled like carpet glue and lemon cleaner. The same metal chairs, the same boxy filing cabinets, the same brittle woman behind the reception desk who always wore hummingbird earrings. "I'm here to check the lien registry," Deborah said. The woman didn't even blink. "Unit number?" Deborah gave the address slowly, even though it was memorized, even though it still half felt like hers. The woman tapped her keyboard. "It's eligible for sale next cycle, 7 days posting window, then public auction." Deborah nodded. "Can I see the file?" A few minutes later, she was seated at a side desk, flipping through paper that should have made her sad but didn't. Fines listed line by line, interest calculations, notices of violation, grass height, oil stains, unauthorized backyard improvements, unpaid quarterly dues. Not a single signature returned, not a single appeal filed. Brooke had let it rot quietly, all while calling herself a homeowner. She slid the last page back into its sleeve and tapped the folder closed. With the precision of someone finishing a test they already knew they passed. On the drive home, she didn't turn the radio on, just listened to the hum of her tires on the asphalt and the soft rattle of her grocery bags shifting in the trunk. She thought about the way Brooke always said, "our home," like it was a badge of arrival. Thought about Tyler's slack-jawed silence that night on the patio. Thought about the refinance notice she saw tucked beneath a stack of unopened mail last time she babysat. Brooke's name bolded, the rejection clean and final. Insufficient equity for requested amount. Deborah knew what that meant. The house wasn't theirs, not completely. And if someone else picked up the right piece of paperwork, if someone with knowledge, patience, and clean finances took the wheel, then the balance would shift. And not just financially, legally. Deborah pulled into her driveway and sat a moment longer, engine off, fingers curled around the steering wheel. She had the savings. Not vast, but solid. She had her pension, her late husband's annuity, the account she used to call rainy day, though lately it had just sat still, untouched. It wasn't about vengeance. It was about truth. And sometimes the best way to get someone's attention is to take away what they assume you'd never touch. Inside, she opened her laptop, typed in the county's lien auction portal, hovered her mouse over pre-qualification information, then clicked. Because if Brooke wouldn't respect what Deborah gave, she'd learn what it meant when Deborah started taking. The county clerk's office didn't look like much. Tan linoleum floors, a sputtering vent in the ceiling, and 2 dying ferns in mismatched plastic pots. But for Deborah, it felt like a boardroom, a battlefield, a bank vault with the doors just beginning to crack. The woman behind the partition was young, 20-something probably, wearing a badge that said Chantel and thick cat-eye glasses that kept slipping down her nose. She greeted Deborah with mild confusion, probably not used to seeing retirees asking about property liens. "I'm looking to understand the residential lien auction process," Deborah said calmly. Chantel blinked. "You mean for investment purposes?" "I mean for resolution," Deborah replied, offering a thin smile. "I'd like to know what I'd need to bid. What the state requires for eligibility." That got her attention. Chantel pulled up a form and slid it through the tray. "You'd need to pre-qualify with proof of funds, submit a bidder's affidavit, and have no outstanding property tax liens yourself." Deborah nodded slowly. "That's doable." The girl tilted her head. "Most folks wait until they've got a list of properties before doing all that." "I'm not most folks," Deborah said, her voice a mirror of what she'd told Karen. Back in her car, she placed the packet neatly into a manila envelope of her own, labeled it in small block letters, Lian Bid Prep, and slid it into the passenger seat like a co-conspirator. She sat there for a long moment before turning the key in the ignition. The last time she'd been at a closing table was 5 years ago. Tyler and Brooke had looked so smug sitting across from the notary. Fresh haircut, white smiles, pre-qualified for a starter mortgage they hadn't fully earned. Deborah had written the check for $27,000 without blinking. Not a loan, not a lien. Just trust. Her name hadn't gone on the deed. Brooke had insisted that would muddy the resale value. Deborah didn't argue. She wanted to believe that helping quietly was more powerful than asserting herself publicly. Later, at the housewarming party, Deborah handed Brooke a small gift, a framed photo of Tyler at age 9, holding a Lego model of a ranch-style home he'd once said he wanted to build her someday. Tucked inside was a folded card. Nothing dramatic. Just a simple, "Thank you for letting me help." Brooke had opened it, squinted, and said, "It's not like she gave us the house, babe." Tyler had laughed. Deborah had smiled like she always did, quietly, tightly, and said she was just glad to see them happy. She hadn't looked at that memory in a long time, but now it came back in full color. Not with rage, with clarity. That evening, she sat at the kitchen table with her checkbook open, confirming balances one line at a time. Savings, stable, annuity, untouched, emergency fund, more than enough. She clipped her forms together, attached her pre-qualification documents, and sealed the envelope with clean precision. On the back, she wrote her name, address, and a small notation in pencil. Lot 217-B/Oakcrest Glen, the same parcel she helped them win, and now the one she intended to hold. At that exact moment across town, Brooke was scrolling Zillow. She had no idea a lien auction was even on the calendar. She was too busy Googling how much her equity position would need to be to qualify for a second refinance. She didn't see the posted notice go live on the HOA bulletin portal. Didn't check the mailbox stacked with past due notices and folded menus. Didn't realize how quiet Deborah had gone in the group chat where she usually asked for birthday sizes and sent clippings from the gardening column. She didn't know the storm wasn't coming anymore. It had already arrived. Just silent, procedural, and signed in blue ink. Deborah stood in the doorway of her sunroom, file in hand, watching a robin pick at the corner of her bird bath. She felt no glee, no adrenaline, just direction. And that was more than enough, because the next envelope would not arrive as a warning. It would arrive as a deed. The brunch invitation arrived by text. Casual, breezy, forced. Brooke, "Hey, wanted to do a little Sunday thing. Just us. You in?" Deborah stared at the screen longer than she needed to. Just us had never been Brooke's style. Not without a motive, not without witnesses. She replied with a thumbs up and no punctuation. Let them interpret the silence however they wanted. The house looked the same, neat enough from the curb, but Deborah's eye caught the overgrown edges where the mulch met the sidewalk. HOA violation waiting to happen. Again. Brooke opened the door too quickly, wearing a peach-colored sweater and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Deborah, you look great," she chirped. Inside, the kitchen smelled like cinnamon rolls from a can and slightly burned coffee. Tyler sat at the breakfast bar, already halfway through a mimosa. "We thought it'd be nice to catch up," Brooke said, waving a hand over the table like she was showcasing a buffet. 2 mugs, 1 chipped, 4 slices of avocado toast, a small dish of strawberries, some already bruising. Deborah offered her a faint smile. "You've been busy." "Totally," Brooke said. "Things have just been non-stop." They sat. Tyler asked about the grandkids' school projects. Deborah answered politely, not warmly. She stirred her coffee with the back of her spoon, letting the silence do most of the work. Then Brooke leaned forward, eyes too wide, voice too sweet. "You know, we've been thinking a lot lately about, generational wealth," she said. "What it means to pass things down, start fresh, rebuild even." Deborah raised an eyebrow. Tyler cleared his throat. "Yeah, what if we just hit reset a little, take inventory, Clean the slate. The cinnamon rolls stayed untouched. Brooke pushed her plate slightly forward, like a peace offering. We know things got weird with the HOA stuff, but honestly, that whole system is kind of broken. It's practically a scam. Deborah tilted her head. A scam? Brooke nodded, warming to her own narrative. Oh, totally. Like, we haven't paid in a while because it's all just petty rules, you know? Grass length and mailbox paint and whatever. We're trying to prioritize bigger things, like stability and family. She emphasized the last word like it was a currency. Deborah smiled faintly, lowering her mug. Totally understand, she said. Bigger things always come first. The moment hung in the air, Brooke searching her face, trying to read whether the landmines had cleared. Tyler said nothing. He looked tired, resigned, or maybe just hungover. Deborah reached into her tote and pulled out a small black pouch. She unzipped it slowly, deliberately, and set her phone face down beside her plate, angled just enough to catch the sound. Neither of them noticed. They were too busy spinning. Brooke launched into a story about a friend who got audited by the HOA and how everything just works differently now. Deborah nodded along, making soft noises of agreement, collecting every phrase, every casual dismissal. When Brooke mentioned the word extortion, Deborah tapped the corner of her napkin like she was blotting butter. This wasn't brunch. This was deposition wrapped in brunch. And Deborah didn't need to ask for an admission. Brooke offered it. Freely. We just figured, if we ignore them long enough, they'll stop bothering us, she said, laughing too loud. I mean, what are they gonna do? Foreclose on the grill? Tyler gave a weak smile. Deborah didn't look at him. She looked at her phone, still recording, still steady, still collecting. She left after 45 minutes, claiming she had a hair appointment. Brooke hugged her a little too long. Tyler barely moved from his chair. Back in her car, Deborah tapped stop on the voice memo and labeled it plainly, Brunch, Admittance of Neglect. She backed out of the driveway, slow and calm, glancing once at the house that sat behind a shaky firewall of charm and borrowed money. They thought she'd softened, that her silence was surrender. They'd forgotten that the quietest ones write the most precise records. And Deborah had just recorded her first piece of evidence. Every morning that week, Deborah checked the county lien portal like clockwork, before her coffee, before the paper, before feeding the cat. Lot 217-B remained untouched. Status, open for auction, no payment. Logged. No legal counsel listed. She waited. By Thursday, the listing window was closed. Auction date, Friday, 10 a.m. sharp. No response from Tyler, no panicked email from Brooke. Just filtered photos of a backyard yoga setup posted on Instagram with captions like, making space to breathe. Deborah printed the final docket anyway. She tucked it into a leather folder, folded a blank check into her wallet, and called her credit union to confirm funds. Her voice was calm, her hands steady. By Friday morning, she was parked outside the Wake County Courthouse by 8:40 a.m., not for nerves, just preparation. She walked in wearing navy slacks, a white blouse, and her husband's old windbreaker, the one he wore to teacher conferences when he needed people to take him seriously. Her gray hair was tied back neatly, no lipstick, no jewelry. She didn't come to impress, she came to purchase. The room was smaller than she expected, just 3 rows of folding chairs, a projector screen, and a worn wooden podium that looked like it had once belonged to a church basement. A clock above the exit door ticked 1 slow second at a time. Deborah took a seat in the second row. There were 3 other bidders. A man in a polo shirt with a tablet resting on his stomach, a woman in heels who kept checking her watch, and a young guy in cargo pants who looked like he'd wandered in from a construction site. None of them looked at her. Good. The clerk stepped to the podium at 10:01 a.m. and began reading through the lots. Parcel numbers, addresses, current lien values, minimum bids. The room stayed quiet, only the scratch of pens on legal pads breaking the silence. When Lot 217-B came up, Deborah's hand was already raised. $1,079, she said clearly. No one countered. The clerk looked up. 1 bid for Lot 217-B. Going once, going twice, sold. The gavel was rubber. The sound it made was anticlimactic. but it still echoed in Deborah's chest. She paid with a cashier's check and signed the paperwork in clean, blocky cursive. The receipt was thin, the claim certificate heavier. It felt like a seed, like a contract and a mirror, all in one. She stepped out of the building into blinding midday sun. The wind caught the edge of her folder and tried to lift it. She held on firmly. There was no applause, no grand unveiling, just gravity and a shift in weight. She drove home without music again. The quiet was her metronome now. As she turned into her cul-de-sac, she saw Brooks' SUV parked crooked in the driveway. Tyler's truck behind it, one tire slightly low. A package sat by the front door. A red tricycle leaned sideways in the grass. Life, still in motion. Unaware. Unprepared. Deborah didn't stop, didn't linger. She pulled into her own garage and shut the door behind her. Inside, she placed the auction receipt on her dining room table beneath a paperweight shaped like a robin's egg. Then, slowly, she opened her email, attached a scanned copy, and typed 2 sentences to Karen. Please confirm Lot 217-B is now listed under lien ownership transfer. Certificate enclosed. She hit send and exhaled. It wasn't just about proving a point anymore. It was about precision and power, the kind that didn't make noise, but changed everything when it landed. Deborah now held the fate of their home, quietly, legally, and with perfect, devastating clarity. Deborah sat in her sunroom with the foreclosure filing instructions printed out and highlighted in 4 places. The late summer heat clung to the windows, turning the glass soft with condensation, but inside she felt cool, focused. The process wasn't fast, but it was exact, like knitting with rules. 30 days of lien ownership, a certified letter, 3 documented attempts to resolve, then a notice of intent to foreclose, then petition, then court. She'd met every step, checked every box. There was only one left. Her landline rang at 3:17 p.m. Caller ID, Tyler's cell. She let it buzz twice before answering. "Hey, Mom." His voice was too light, like he didn't know whether this was casual or code red. Deborah kept her tone neutral. "Hi, Tyler. Just checking in. The girls have their school supply lists. Longer every year, right? I know things have been tense. But I was wondering if you'd be willing to help cover backpacks and stuff this month." Still no apology. Still no mention of the lien, of the envelope, of the auction. Deborah looked down at the foreclosure folder. Her thumb rested on the line marked Line Holder Initiation Date. She softened her voice. "Just a hair." "Of course. Send me the list." Tyler sighed, relieved. "Thanks, Mom. Really." She hung up, then filed the paperwork. By the next morning, the certified letter had been stamped and sent. The envelope, fat with proof and polite legalese, would land on their doorstep by Monday at the latest. Notice of foreclosure initiation. Lot 217-B. It was not a warning. It was the start of extraction. The call came the following Thursday. Unexpected, sharp, from a number Deborah didn't recognize. She debated letting it go to voicemail, but something in her stomach told her to pick up. "Deborah, this is Linda Patterson, Brooks' mother." The voice was a full octave higher than Brooks, dry, impatient, already set to outrage. "I cannot believe you sent that letter. Do you know how humiliating it is to find out through a neighbor that your granddaughter's home is being threatened by their own grandmother? Is this about the cookout? Because frankly," Deborah kept her tone clipped, "it's not about deviled eggs, Linda. It's about ownership, financial, legal, and moral." "Oh, please," Linda hissed. "You didn't have to go through the board. You could have come to me." "I didn't think I needed to," Deborah replied, calm. "I assumed they'd tell Tyler." There was a pause, a charged one. Then, too fast to catch herself, Linda snapped, "Brooks said not to." She didn't want him panicking before the refinance. Deborah blinked. The silence that followed was heavier than any insult Linda could have thrown. She had her answer. Brooke had hidden the notice, hidden the debt, hidden the lien. All to maintain a facade, a curated reality with good lighting and fake brunches and Instagram captions. Tyler didn't know. Linda seemed to realize her misstep in real time. "I mean, He probably knew something was off, she added quickly. You know how men are. Deborah hung up. She sat still for a long time, watching the light shift across the hardwood floor. Her anger wasn't loud, it never had been. But it was there now, concentrated. Not at Tyler, not even at Linda. Just at the rot. The quiet, consistent rot of deception masked as charm. The generational entitlement wrapped in faux empowerment. The smile that said thanks but meant you're disposable. She stood, walked to the closet, and pulled out the foreclosure duplicate. Brooke hadn't just mismanaged the house, she'd mismanaged the truth. And now Deborah had one more thing in her pocket. An admission from Linda that Tyler had been cut out of the loop entirely. That wasn't just strategic negligence, that was willful concealment. Deborah picked up her pen and wrote one clean sentence at the top of the file folder: deed by proxy. Divorce in motion? She didn't know when. But she knew the house wasn't the only thing about to come apart. The knock came harder than necessary. 3 sharp pounds on the front door, no pause, no doorbell, no text first. Deborah didn't flinch. She already knew who it was. She placed her tea on a coaster, stood, and walked toward the door with even steps. The hallway was quiet except for the soft creak of floorboards and the low hum of the ceiling fan in the kitchen. When she opened it, Tyler stood on the porch, flushed, fists balled like he wasn't sure whether to shout or apologize. You filed foreclosure? Deborah blinked once. Come in, or do you want the whole street to hear this? He stepped inside, shoulders tight, jaw clenched. The door clicked shut behind them. I cannot believe you went this far, he said. What the hell, Mom? You blindsided us. Brooke is freaking out. She's saying you're trying to steal the house. Deborah didn't move, didn't interrupt, just walked calmly to her credenza, opened the second drawer, and pulled out a slim black binder. She handed it to him. Tyler looked down at it like it was a live wire. What is this? Every notice, Deborah said. Every warning from the HOA, every certified mailing, date-stamped, indexed, chronologically filed. He opened it. Slowly. There was no drama in her voice. No gloating. Just clean facts, stacked like bricks. I didn't forge anything. I didn't make up a rule. I followed the same bylaws you signed when you closed on the house. Page 14, subsection 3C, she added, motioning toward the folder. Lion ownership, redemption timelines, forfeiture penalties. Tyler turned a few more pages. Red ink, missed deadlines, return receipts unclaimed. And then he froze. This one's from March. Deborah nodded. You were already 2 quarters behind by then. She never said. His voice cracked, low and rough. No, Deborah said. She didn't. He looked up, and in that moment Deborah saw the exact second her son realized the story he'd been told was not the one he'd been living in. She didn't tell me about any of this, he said quietly now. Not one letter. Not one late fee. Deborah watched him, watched the unraveling begin. I thought we were waiting on the refinance, that's what she said, that the HOA was giving us room because we had good standing. Deborah stepped past him, returning to her chair. You had standing, you lost it. Tyler sat down without asking, binder still in his lap. I thought you were just being dramatic, at the cookout with the envelope. She shook her head. That was the mild version. He didn't argue. He didn't defend her, but for once, he didn't defend Brooke either. The silence settled. Then Deborah spoke again, measured but not cold. I didn't take your house, I saved it, from a public auction, from a developer with no emotional attachment and cash to burn. She leaned forward slightly. If you don't want me to own it, pay the debt. It's that simple. Tyler opened his mouth, then closed it. There was too much to say and too little ground left to stand on. He stood slowly, the binder still in his hands, and walked toward the door without asking for a ride, a refund, or a reprieve. Does she know I know? He asked, one hand on the doorknob. Deborah tilted her head. Not yet. He nodded once. Just once. Then left. She didn't follow. Later, she watched through the blinds as his truck pulled out of her driveway. He sat in the cab longer than he needed to, binder on the passenger seat, engine running, idle. Then he drove off. Deborah let the blinds fall back into place. Her tea had gone cold. But the house? The house had gone quiet. And for the first time in weeks, it was the kind of quiet she welcomed. The ignition had sparked, and Tyler was no longer driving blind. The first thing Deborah noticed was the footprint. Right below her living room window, in the garden bed, one sneaker print, small enough to be a woman's, half sunk in the mulch. The begonias she'd planted in early May were snapped at the stems, and someone had thrown a plastic juice pouch into the bird bath. She didn't need a confession. She didn't need footage. She just needed to log it. At the police station, she filled out the form with the same calm as if she were renewing her license. Minor vandalism, no visible suspects. Requesting formal incident number for property record. The officer behind the glass looked like a kid in a borrowed uniform. He didn't ask questions, just stamped the form and handed her a copy. "Do you want to list a name?" he asked almost lazily. Deborah shook her head. Number, just the facts. Back home, she placed the report inside a slim file folder labeled Incident, Exterior Disruption. No drama, no escalation, just the record. The next day, Brooke showed up on her porch unannounced, holding a Tupperware of brownies in one hand and her youngest daughter in the other. The older girl trailed behind, clutching a bubble wand and refusing to look up. Deborah didn't say anything at first, just opened the screen door with a neutral expression and waited for Brooke to speak. "Hey," Brooke said brightly, like she was arriving for book club. "We were just out doing errands and thought we'd swing by." Deborah glanced at the Tupperware. "I didn't bake them," Brooke admitted quickly. "They're from Fresh Market, but the kids picked them out. Right, sweetheart?" The toddler blinked up at Deborah, then buried her face in Brooke's hip. "Come in," Deborah said quietly. They stepped into the kitchen. Deborah poured lemonade, ice cubes, real glasses, no fanfare. Brooke sat at the table, legs crossed too tightly, her smile rehearsed and anxious. She chatted about school enrollment, flu season, the neighbor's dog getting loose again. Deborah nodded occasionally. She offered the girls coloring books from the side drawer, turned on the old box fan for background noise, and made no move to mention anything else. But Brooke couldn't stand the silence for long. She set her lemonade down, cleared her throat, and leaned forward just slightly. "Look, I know things got tangled, but we've all said things, right?" She laughed too quickly. "The cookout, the envelopes, the legal stuff. I think it's time we started rebuilding some trust." Deborah tilted her head, her gaze level. She didn't blink. "Trust wasn't lost, Brooke." Brooke gave a cautious smile, hopeful. "It was broken," Deborah said. "With your voice." Brooke's expression froze. Deborah placed her glass down gently. "And I repaired it," she added, "with paperwork." For the first time since stepping through the door, Brooke didn't have a response. Her mouth opened like she might laugh it off, then closed again. She looked down at her glass. "It doesn't have to stay this way." Deborah stood and walked to her desk. She returned with an envelope and slid it across the table. "This is what it costs to clear the lien," she said. Itemized, dated. Final. Brooke stared at the envelope like it was glowing. "No negotiations?" "This isn't a yard sale," Deborah said evenly. "It's a legal obligation." The older child looked up from her coloring book. Brooke quickly gathered her composure. "Right. Of course. Thank you," she stood, gathering the kids with brisk, cheerful efficiency. As they moved toward the door, Deborah followed. No goodbyes, no hugs. On the porch, Brooke turned once more. "I'm trying, you know," she said. "I really am." Deborah didn't answer. She just closed the door gently behind them. Inside, she sat at the table and picked up her lemonade. The ice had thinned to slivers. She sipped slowly, then reached for the incident report and tucked it into the same folder. Payment demand. 2 forms, 2 kinds of damage, both documented, and next time Brooke came knocking, Deborah wouldn't need to raise her voice. She'd already filed her answer. The letter from the clerk arrived on a Thursday. Plain envelope, no fanfare, just a clean line of legal text and 2 signatures at the bottom confirming what Deborah already knew in principle, but now held on paper. She was no longer just the lien holder. Due to delay in equity clearance and non-payment of the redemption window, Deborah Taylor was now partial title holder of Lot 217-B co-owner. Officially. She sat at her kitchen table staring at the page while the slow tick of the stove clock marked time in half seconds. The cat slept curled near her feet. The world didn't shift, but she had. Not in anger, in certainty. She folded the letter neatly, placed it into a slim green folder marked Title Transfer, Provisional, and filed it next to her birth certificate. It wasn't revenge. Not anymore. It was real estate. Across town, Brooke was staging photos for a home that no longer fully belonged to her. She swapped out the expensive throw pillows for neutral ones, hid the designer coffee table book, draped an old Afghan over the arm of the sofa, tried to make the house look cozy instead of high maintenance. The listing was technically just for rent, a placeholder on a low-trafficked website, but the photos screamed retreat, damage control, downplay, deflect. As if the home would look less valuable in a browser window, it might somehow lower the weight of her shame. Deborah didn't comment. She just took screenshots. Karen called later that week. FYI, she said. Brooke's mother called the board, asked if we'd be open to a buyout on your lien, quietly. Deborah raised her eyebrows. And? I told her that wasn't our decision to make anymore. Good, Deborah said. It's not. Karen chuckled. Didn't think you'd sell, but figured you should know. Appreciated. She hung up and made no notes. The offer didn't matter. Not anymore. It was never about the money. It was about being seen. Tyler showed up 3 days later. No warning. No text. Just the knock. Soft this time. Hesitant. Deborah opened the door expecting a request. What she got was a shift. He looked smaller somehow, less angry. Eyes bloodshot but focused, a folder in his hand, thinner than hers had ever been. Can I come in? He asked. She nodded, stepping aside. They didn't sit. He held the folder between them like a peace flag folded in half. I've been in therapy, he said quietly. Not long, just enough to start seeing things clearer. Deborah said nothing. Let him speak. She lied to me, for months, and I let her. Because it was easier than calling it what it was. His voice cracked a little, but he didn't stop. I know you've taken a lot of hits, and I know I didn't defend you when I should have. Still, Deborah said nothing. I've talked to a lawyer. I'm filing for divorce next week. Silence stretched between them like a fault line. Tyler opened the folder and handed her a single sheet of paper. It's a quitclaim draft. I want to sign the deed over to you. Fully. No strings, no equity split. Deborah finally blinked. You're giving me the house. I'm giving you what was always partly yours. She stared at the paper like it might dissolve. Why now? She asked. Because I'm tired of being complicit, he said, and because you're the only one in this story who told the truth. It wasn't apology. It wasn't absolution. It was something rarer, accountability. She reached out and took the paper. Her hands didn't shake, but her breath did. Later, she sat alone at her dining table, rereading the document under a pool of yellow lamplight. One line, one signature box, one final shift. For years, Brooke had acted like the house was hers. For months, Deborah had been treated like a visitor. Now even the walls would carry her name. But for the first time in this long, bitter saga, Deborah didn't feel triumphant. She felt chosen, and that was far more dangerous. The email came through at 9:12 a.m., just after Deborah had finished folding the last of the dish towels and before her second cup of tea. Subject: escrow closed. Title transfer confirmed. She read the words twice, not because she didn't believe them, but because they sounded so much like punctuation, a period on the longest sentence she'd ever lived through. She walked to the window, the one that overlooked Lot 217-B. Brooke's SUV was parked crooked in the driveway again, its rear hatch open. Trash bags, a laundry basket, and one bright pink suitcase sat clustered near the bumper. A stack of lawn chairs leaned against the garage wall like they'd been forgotten, or deliberately left behind. Deborah didn't go over, didn't wave. She'd already said everything she needed to. 2 days later, the house was empty. Deborah waited until the second key was dropped through her mail slot, sealed in an envelope with no note. B. 4 walking across the street with a clipboard and a spare set of gloves. The house smelled stale, a faint mix of lemon floor cleaner and something that hadn't quite dried right. She opened the windows, lit a cedar candle, and turned on every light. No dramatics, just air, just ownership. Room by room, she made small choices. The guest room was first. She boxed up the leftover nursery decor and replaced it with 2 low bookshelves, a soft armchair, and a braided rug her granddaughters had picked out at Target months ago. On the windowsill, she set a wooden sign that read, "Quiet Adventures Welcome Here." It wasn't a nursery anymore. It was a nook, for readers, for thinkers, for children who needed a place where the story was always safe. The letter she sent Brooke arrived by certified mail 2 days after the move-out. She kept it short. Lot 217-B is now fully cleared and closed. Hope the lawn chairs fit in your car. D. No spite, no capitalized gloating, just a line, one Brooke would understand. She hung the final unpaid HOA notice in a simple black frame and mounted it above her desk, not out of pettiness, out of memory. A reminder that silence has a paper trail, and that pretending not to hear consequences doesn't mean they aren't arriving. Below it, she added a small brass plaque, "Resolved, not erased." Later that week, she received an envelope from the HOA board, a formal thank you letter typed on letterhead and signed by every committee member except Brooke's old tennis partner. Your efforts to stabilize the lot have prevented outside acquisition and preserved neighborhood continuity. We thank you for your leadership. She didn't smile when she read it. But she did fold it cleanly, 3 even sections, and slip it behind the unpaid notice in the frame. Both belonged there now. Action and outcome. Origin and reply. The bouquet came the next afternoon. Delivered by a tired teenager who read her name twice before handing it over. White roses, eucalyptus, and a note. Thanks for staying steady. I'm trying. Tyler. She placed the arrangement on the mantel, next to a small ceramic turtle her granddaughter had made in art class. The room felt different now, less performative, more grounded. She didn't call him to thank him, not yet. Some messages speak louder when left unanswered. That night, Deborah made tea and stood in the doorway of the new reading nook. The armchair sat in perfect light. The shelves were filled, the walls didn't echo. The house was hers now. Not just in deed, but in spirit. And across town, in a rented duplex with peeling blinds and too few outlets, Brooke sat cross-legged on the floor, opening her mail and reading the line about the lawn chairs 4 times before realizing the letter wasn't sarcasm. It was closure. Deborah had turned the page, and Brooke hadn't even noticed the story had ended. Until now. The knock this time was soft. 2 taps, barely audible over the steady hum of Deborah's window fan. She wiped her hands on a dish towel, set down the paring knife, and crossed the kitchen with a steadiness she no longer had to perform. When she opened the door, Brooke stood there alone. No kids, no SUV, no sunglasses, just a Pyrex casserole dish cradled in both hands, steam fogging up the foil. She looked smaller than Deborah remembered, not physically, but inward. As if her shape had collapsed around an apology that refused to come out in full. Deborah said nothing. Brooke cleared her throat, eyes lowered. "It's chicken and rice," she murmured. "My mom's recipe. You probably hate it." Deborah took the dish. It was warm, real, heavier than expected. Brooke didn't move. "I know I mocked you once," she said, barely above a whisper. "I said things I thought were funny. They weren't." She looked up. "You deserved more than what we gave you." Still, Deborah didn't speak. She stepped aside. Brooke entered without hesitation, without invitation, like someone remembering what it used to feel like to belong. They sat at the kitchen table. The same table where the binder had once opened like a guillotine, the same table where the itemized lien notice had been slid across like a dealer's hand in a final round of cards. But now it held only dinner. Deborah removed the foil, cut 2 even squares, and plated them in silence. No side dishes, no salad, no wine. Just what had been offered, and what had been earned. They ate slowly, forks clicking gently against ceramic. Brooke's shoulders tight, then looser. The quiet between them wasn't awkward. It was stitched together by shared memory, shared damage, and the quiet endurance of two women who'd both underestimated the other. After 20 minutes, Brooke stood. "I should go," she said. Deborah nodded once. At the door, Brooke turned halfway, then stopped. Not for drama, not for redemption, just to say, "Thanks for taking care of it." Deborah didn't nod, didn't dismiss, just held her gaze, level and even. "You're welcome." Brooke walked. Down the steps slowly, keys jangling in her coat pocket. At the bottom of the driveway, she hesitated, then kept walking. No car waited, no ride pulled up. She was heading somewhere else now, not home, just forward. Deborah watched her go until the street swallowed her up. Then she closed the door, not with finality, with ease. The next day was the 4th of July. Cloudless sky, mild breeze, the kind of weather local weathermen labeled storybook. Deborah set up folding tables in her front yard, laid gingham runners, filled plastic bins with iced sodas and watermelon cubes. A neighbor brought coleslaw. Another brought cupcakes with tiny flags. Someone else arrived with sparklers, grinning. By 5 o'clock, half the block was there. No speeches, no ceremony. Just laughter, feet in the grass, paper plates balancing on knees, children squealing at bubbles, conversations overlapping like quilt patches. At the edge of it all, Deborah stood near the grill, flipping burgers and slicing buns, her hands steady, and her name no longer forgotten. Someone asked where the deviled eggs were. "I'll bring them next year," she said, smiling. Later, as dusk fell, a neighbor's speaker crackled with Springsteen. Fireworks popped off in the distance. Deborah leaned against her porch rail, watching the lights flicker over her granddaughters' faces as they danced barefoot in the yard. A plastic flag rested between the slats of her fence. The mailbox was freshly painted, the grass trimmed to regulation height, the title deed filed, and somewhere a casserole dish cooled in her sink. This year, she served the food, and no one wondered why she was there.